All right. Thank you for joining, everyone. My name is Dan Reichert, and I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer with Sumo Logic. And today I'm going to be walking you through a demonstration of our Kubernetes solution, as well as some other information as well about how the solution works and how you're going to get immediate value out of it. Now, also on the call is my colleague, Duncan Robb. He'll be providing some assistance as well as helping with the questions. And a little bit of background on Sumo Logic before we jump in. We were started in 2010 and we're deployed across 8 regions and 5 continents with over 2,000 customers across virtually every industry, including healthcare, finance, IT, and entertainment. They're using Sumo to proactively monitor, troubleshoot, and secure their applications and systems. And you can also use Sumo with any type of plain text formatted log, as well as time series metric, where that data is going to be immediately searchable, alertable, and dashboardable. Sumo is also going to allow devs, operations, and security teams to rapidly increase their rate of release cycles, harden security postures, and maximize uptime for their customers. And today we're going to be working through how we could achieve these results with Kubernetes and Sumo. Now, before we get started, just know that the recording of the webinar will be sent out after the session. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the question and answer. And then Duncan will be able to get them over to me. So format of this webinar pretty much is that we're going to go through sort of like this crawl, walk, run type of format, where I'm going to show you an easy use case of using our Kubernetes solution and how we might be able to get things back up and running or having a memory issue on one of our pods. From there, we're going to go a little bit deeper into how the data is going to be pulled into Sumo. And then we're going to go into a little bit of how you could get some immediate insights into your data using our app catalog, how you might be able to build it out from scratch, and then also the training and enablement that's available to you. And then from there, we're going to go into a little bit more of a deeper investigation, getting our hands dirty, and mainly going into those logs to troubleshoot another issue in another pod. And finally, we're going to wrap it up with some questions and answers. Now, for that, we're going to go ahead and jump over into our actual solution in here. Now, what we're doing in here is we're visualizing all of our different components of our Kubernetes cluster. We're getting some insights from things like our CPU utilizations, memory utilizations, and all kind of other information as well. But over on the left-hand side here, we're able to get this nice, easy to consume idea about what clusters we might have going into Sumo that we're monitoring. If I had any other clusters on here, they'd show up on here. But for now, we just have the one cluster. But we could also go deeper than that. We don't have to be looking at just our cluster. If we select our cluster in here, we're in our namespace view, we can actually get a list of all the namespaces in that cluster. We could go deeper into that namespace. And then when we pull that up, we're going to see all the different pods that are part of that namespace as well. And even deeper, we could go into a pod and see the containers in that pod. Now, everyone has their own ways to be visualizing their IT systems or their architectures. It's how we're all going to relate the hierarchies together and understand it. So you don't actually have to look by just your namespace view. You could also view it in different ways and different lenses, such as through a deployment or a node or a service as well on top of that namespace. So for example, maybe I want to see some health of my nodes. I could actually just select the node view. Again, it's going to list out my clusters on here. And I could drill into a cluster. And it's going to show me the nodes that are in that cluster. And finally, we're going to get deeper into those pods and the containers again on there. So all kind of different ways we can navigate through this and get some understandings of it and really help visualize this, this whole really complex hierarchy that Kubernetes is presenting to us. Now, all of this is controlled through different sets of metadata that we'll go into in a little bit of how it's getting attached to all of our logs and all of our metrics to help correlate it around on here. But what you might also have noticed is every single time I'm selecting one of these different elements in my Kubernetes cluster, I'm actually getting a different view showing up on here. And that's allowing me to automatically get those insights that are valuable to really understand the health of my environment, find out what's going wrong, and get things back up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through an example of how we might be able to use that to troubleshoot an issue where a pod might be having some sort of memory issue. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to my namespace view. And when I do that, I'm going to see right up here, again, we see some high level information around our resource utilizations. I'm going to expand this out just a little bit. We can see a high level information around our resource utilizations. We could come down a little bit deeper and see things like our errors by our namespaces. We can see security rules that are triggered as well, which, by the way, we're able to provide those insights that will, through our Falco integration, that we're going to go into during our data collection portion of this the webinar. But maybe I want to get some deeper information around my security. I can actually select from a dropdown up here and see all the other dashboards that are available to a cluster level of my Kubernetes environment. So for the security, I can actually select that one, and it'll pull up an overview of the security health of my environment that's being provided from Falco. But back over in that cluster overview, we'll go back into that one. Right now, the most concerning thing to us is probably this namespace issue right here on this prod loggen namespace. Now, a little bit of background, that prod loggen namespace is one that we use to basically generate all this fake data and metrics that's going into these visualizations that we're using to help demonstrate the tool to you. So it's a little bit concerning when we're seeing some issues on that. We want to get that up and running and make sure there's no issues on it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to drill into this prod loggen namespace by going into our cluster, and we're going to select the prod loggen namespace. And when we do that, we're going to get a namespace overview pointing directly at that prod loggen namespace in the cluster. And just like before, we see that we had 7 pods that are running. 2 of them are in a failed state. And that's giving us a little bit better idea about where we might want to look. We come down a little bit further and we look at these honeycombs down here to see that our Carbon Black pod, as well as our PagerDuty pod, are both having some errors on there. So for this case, we're going to work on getting our Carbon Black pod up and running because that's probably one of the most important ones. We don't want that one to be down. We want to make sure we have all the right security insights and everything as soon as possible. Now, when we highlight over this, what we're going to notice is that pod it's off and it's on and it's off and it's on, that we're noticing in this sparkline graph that's showing up on there. So it's some sort of crash loop back off going on right now, and we want to get to the bottom of that and get it back up and running into a stable state. So for this, we're going to go drill even deeper. We're going to go ahead and select the Carbon Black pod. Again, we're going to get now a Carbon Black dashboard pointing to we're going to get the pod dashboard pointing directly to our Carbon Black pod. And we see, just like we saw in there, that we had a pod that's in a crash loop back off with thousands of restarts. And we start coming out a little bit further into deeper details. And we look at our pod state. We see that it's on and it's ready, and then it's back off, and then it's on and ready, and so on and so forth, at least for the last hour. So it's something cyclical, something that might be predictable, that we could figure out what's going wrong with that. And hopefully that adjustment will get things going for us here. So we'll come down a little bit further now. Maybe something will start standing out to us. And we look at this one right here, memory usage versus limits versus requests. Now, this is an important panel, and it's really important to make sure that you do have some limits on your resource utilizations of your pods, because you don't want like any pod to have free reign to have however many resources it wants, because it could take everything from everything else on there, or you might end up with a huge bill at the end of the month there. So we want to make sure that we have some limits on that. But when we look at it, the black line over here is the amount of resources being used, and then the red line is going to be the limit. So the pod is basically spiking up in the amount of memory that it's using, and then it's coming back down once it goes over that limit, and then it's consistently doing that over and over. So we could pretty much figure this out at this point. It's probably a memory issue, but just to confirm some things, we're going to come down a little bit deeper, and we're going to look at our terminated containers by reason panel right here. And what we're going to notice is right here an event took place that's saying that it's out of memory and it killed that pod. So at this point, we know that pod is failing, and it's in its crash loop back off because it doesn't have enough memory allocated to it. So we're going to up those limits, and hopefully that should resolve it. We were able to get this all figured out and back up and running without having to run a single kubectl command. Now, for me personally, I've been learning Kubernetes for about 2 years. Never feel like I'm caught up to it. I think everyone out there that I've talked to, all my customers, they're all pretty much in the same state. But I can say personally, anecdotally, this has really made things so much simpler to grasp this really complex new architecture that we're all trying to learn. it's really exponentially brought my education of this new solution even further, and I definitely recommend to play around with it, even for a personal way to understand your Kubernetes environments. Now, how do we get this data in here? How do we start getting these great visualizations on it? We're going to take a step back now and go into how the data is going to flow in to Sumo through our collection. And then from there, we're going to go into how we can get the insights into this using our pre-built content that you're going to find in the app catalog, as well as building out your own content. So we're going to jump back over into this presentation in here. Now, when it comes to setting data into Sumo, typically we have installed collectors and hosted collectors. I'm not going to go into that one right now, but know that for the most part, the data is being sent over via an HTTPS hosted collection. Now, to get that all set up, we could go through this on here. Now, collection of your data from your Kubernetes environment relies on a combination of FluentBit, FluentD, Prometheus, and Falco. They're all open source data collections maintained by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and they're all actively maintained by a large community of contributors. So virtually any type of data that you're looking to collect probably has some sort of integration at this point with one of these collections that we're using. So you could use it for more than just Sumo after this as well. Now, the collectors are going to be sent to a centralized FluentD pipeline for metadata enrichment. And that enrichment is going to allow the data to have different metadata, such as your cluster, your service, your deployment, all the way down to your pod and your container, to be attached to every single log, every single metric, so that you could say that this exact log happened at this exact time in this exact container in this exact cluster. And then we could pivot around to the metrics. So we could keep pivoting back and forth because of that metadata enrichment that took place through that FluentD pipeline. Now, this is all set up really simply through a single Helm chart command. Every environment is different, and there are slight variations to everyone's setup depending on how you have Kubernetes configured. But basically, it could be as simple as saying something like Helm install Sumo Logic, provide your access key and ID as well as the name of your cluster, and then that Helm chart will take care of the rest. It's going to set up all these different collections. It's going to start feeding that data into the FluentD pipeline, and that FluentD is going to start shooting it over to Sumo via HTTPS. And then on the Sumo side, that Helm chart will also go ahead and set up all your collectors and all your sources needed to ingest that data and start indexing it automatically for you. In all, once you press enter, run your Helm chart command, you can have some insights and visualizations in your Kubernetes cluster within 5 or 10 minutes. Now, getting a little bit deeper on this, for FluentBit, for the logs, that's all going to be sent over via FluentBit. For metrics, we're going to be sticking to the industry standard of Prometheus. Now, Prometheus is going to auto-discover not only your Kubernetes things, but also any sort of custom instrumentation in your apps. And that auto-discovery will allow the Explorer view that we were just looking at to stay up to date with a live state of your environment. Now, typically, there's two big issues with Prometheus in and of its own. It's a great tool, but those two issues are pretty significant. One is that there's a scalability issue. As you scale, as you get more clusters, you're going to start ending up with multiple Prometheus instances that are going to make it very difficult to monitor across all those clusters and namespaces. And the other thing is that Prometheus was never intended for a long-term retention. Now, I went to KubeCon this past year, and this was a pretty big topic discussion of, how do we really scale Prometheus? How do we make sure that it supports our large amounts of data so we can really get all these insights into our clusters? And outside of a third-party solution, most people's answers was pretty much just brute force it with a ton of resources, and your problem is solved. Throw all the memory, all the storage you can at it, and you're good. But honestly, that's a lot of work. That's very difficult. So a solution like Sumo Logic will allow us to bring all this data together, allow you to correlate your clusters, allow you to scale your metrics, and have that long-term retention to really get the appropriate insights and value that you need. We've been in the metrics game for a few years now, so the metric solution itself is not new for us. So we've had plenty of experience with the complex scalability issue around metrics for some time now. Now, finally, events. Those are going to be collected through a FluentD plugin that we developed. It's going to run in its own deployment. And all the events are going to go to an API server. So the plugin is essentially going to watch the API server. New events are going to be shipped to Sumo via HBS. And finally, one other thing is security. The big thing that we all like to act like isn't there, but we really do need to pay attention to it. And one of the biggest challenges is in Kubernetes is this whole growing realization that we need to monitor and we need to secure these Kubernetes environments. Just like a lot of new technologies, there's always this little promise of, it's secure by design. You don't really have to worry about it too much, but that's simply not the case as we all end up learning for every new technology. As it becomes more popular, people start finding the vulnerabilities. And then by that time, all the vulnerabilities are out there and no one was prepared for it. And then we're in a world of hurt. So we don't want this to be reactive. We don't want security to be a second thought. So we included the Falco integration with the Helm chart so that you can be proactive about it. You can have security early on and monitoring the security of your environment like I was showing you earlier in those dashboards. Now, out of the box, our Kubernetes app is going to include that integration with Falco. And it's an open source tool that's going to automatically detect anomalous activity and security events. And Falco is going to utilize the kernel module, user space libraries, and Kubernetes audit events to watch for the security events that are defined. And all that data, just like your logs, will be forwarded over via Fluent Bit. So with that, we're going to go ahead and pivot a little bit into, now that we have this data flowing into Sumo, how do we get the insights into this right away? So I'm going to go ahead and get out of this and jump back over into Sumo in here. Now, when you want to start getting some insights into your data that you're sending over, the first place you're going to want to look is over in the app catalog. Now, our apps, those are pretty much, you could think of them much more of like a collection of queries or dashboards. They're going to work as is right out of the box without anything that you have to do to get it working. You could actually just set it up and use it as is, or you could completely customize every dashboard and every query exactly as you need. So they're pretty much templates or examples that work just right there out of box. No tickets to file, nothing going on behind the scenes that you could not have done on your own there. So for example, maybe we're using AWS. Maybe we want to get some insights into our CloudTrail along with our Kubernetes clusters. We could actually just go ahead and select this CloudTrail app right up here, select Add to Library, and we point it to the CloudTrail logs that we already have coming in, and we select Add to Library. At that point, we're going to get these dashboards populated over into our personal folder, and then we could use them however we want. So for example, if we open up our console logins dashboard, we might start looking at some things on here. We're going to start seeing things like our logins by our users, our logins over times, outliers on our logins. But most importantly to us right now might be this logins from outside the US. Maybe we don't have any employees outside the US, or we don't have any customers outside the US. So any activity going on out there, in the very least, we need to check that out. So we're probably going to want to have this turned into an alert. So to do that, we're just simply going to grab the query from there. And as you can see, it is a little bit longer of a query, but honestly, you don't have to worry about that. We've done the hard part for you. We've built all this for you, and you can just change it as you might need at this point. But maybe this is perfect. This is exactly what we want. And then to go ahead and turn this into an alert, all we need to do is select Save As. And we're going to call it Logins from Outside the USA. And I like to put alert at the end on here, just so it's easier to find if I ever unschedule it. And I come down and I'm going to schedule the search. And I'm going to set my run frequency from never. And I'm going to select real time, as in as that data is flowing in, constantly run this query. And if it hits that threshold, send me an alert. But I could also have it run at static intervals, like every 15 minutes, hourly, even down to a daily, weekly, and a custom cron job for how often the query will run. But for now, we're going to go ahead and do a real-time alert. And we're going to look at the last 15 minutes worth of data. And basically, as long as we have any results at all, then send it to us via email. Or we could also select a webhook, for example, to forward our alerts over to there. So if we have anything like Slack, PagerDuty, HipChat, or anything else that's able to generate webhooks, we could set up those integrations and have our alerts sent to there. So I'm going to go ahead and select my, let's say my Prado one alerts connection, and I would come down and save it. And at that point, whenever I hit that threshold, in this case, anyone logging in from outside the US, we're going to get that alert sent over into our Slack channel. So that's how we could quickly get those insights into our environment using our app catalog, and then how we might be able to want to customize it a little bit and turn it into an alert. But as you can see, if we go back into our app catalog over here, it's not just AWS. We have insights and apps for tons of different services out there. Actually, every day, we're pretty much getting a notification of some new content that's coming out very soon. So our apps team is very, very hard at work building out new content, constantly populating this catalog on here. One thing I didn't mention earlier was we also can work with control planes for the big three Kubernetes cloud providers, including GKE, EKS, and AKS. And you'll be able to grab the content from here to get your insights into your control planes as well. Now, let's suppose we want to get a little bit deeper. Maybe what we're looking for isn't in any of this. Maybe it's a custom app that we want to get some insights into. So, you can use our app catalog as a starting point, use it as examples to build out your own custom content, but maybe we want to do this from scratch. So first thing, I'm going to go ahead and clean this all up on here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up a new log search. And when I do that, it's going to bring us into our log query language. And it's a pretty simple one. Basically, as your data, back in the collection, as your data is starting to get sent over, we're going to fully index everything for you. So you don't have to worry about setting up your indexes or set up grok expressions or anything else like that. So maybe we want to search for a username Matthew in all of our logs, and we want to look in the last hour's worth of data. We could just type that in there and run start, and it's going to pull up any log that contains that username in some way, shape, or form. Or maybe we want to look at our cluster logs. Again, if we look back over in our collection, I'm going to go ahead and type this in here instead of trying to talk and type at the same time. We could actually go ahead and bring in all of our cluster logs from that Prod01 instance on here. And now when we run this, we're going to see all the logs that happen in the last hour's worth of data starting to come into this. But because of that metadata enrichment process that it's going through FluentD, we're getting all the different metadata tags, not only just our cluster, but now if we look into our Field Explorer on here, we could get insights as well as to what logs from all of our different levels are populating the 103,000 results that we have on this. So obviously we just have the one cluster because we're pointing to just that one on here. But we can also see that we have 11 different containers. We have 2 different namespaces that are part of that. We have all the different pods. So all kind of different ways that we could identify the appropriate data and pivot around as needed. Now, we have some data up here. Let's go through a simple workflow of saying that we want to visualize our rate of error logs. Now, when we look at this message right here, this might be the one we want to work with. Because it's in a JSON format, we could easily parse out and normalize that data by right-clicking on a key and select Parse a selected key. Now, JSON, it's a really nice and easy one to work with. A lot of vendors have a nice solution for it right now. But when it comes to a bit more of a flat file format, that's when the fun begins. That's really when some of the tools out there might make it quite a bit difficult to really normalize these types of logs where you didn't grok it, you didn't pre-parse it, you didn't have it in a specific format that you can work with, and it's a lot more unstructured. Fortunately, because we fully index everything, we could parse this all out at query time. So for this, we're actually just going to go ahead and highlight out our function name on here. Maybe we want to extract the function name out from every one of our logs, and we can right-click on that and select Parse a selected text. And now we're going to grab the value out of that, and we're going to call that func name and submit that. And now we have what's called a parse anchor. We could also use regular expressions and a few other methods as well to extract and normalize out that data. But once I run this, we're now going to see all those logs. However, there's columns now on there for those values that we extracted. Now we want to get the rate of these errors. We simply are going to put a where statement on here. So we're going to say where level name matches error. Put some integrity on that and make sure we're looking at the right logs. And then we're going to time slice it. And what that's doing is that's saying in this last 60 minutes, let's take every single minute from that time range and break it up into its own individual and its own individual buckets on that. So it's actually not doing anything until we start aggregating it, which that's what we're going to do now. So now we're going to count as errors by underscore time slice. We run that again, and now we could see every minute over the last hour with every single count of errors that we've had in there. And we can now click on these icons and visualize it in different ways. So we have these the visualization, we got the insights on this, and at this point we want to turn this into a dashboard. So all we have to do is simply select Add to Dashboard. And I'm going to call this, let's call it Errors Over Time. And then in my dashboard, I can actually select any dashboard I already have control over, including those ones that I had already installed from the app catalog, or I could create a brand new one. So I'm going to call this Systems Overview. If I could type it in here. And I'm going to create a new dashboard. And right now, for a lot of our users, you could simply select Add, but I'm actually going to create a new dashboard with our new dashboard framework. So if anyone has been using Sumo for some time, you know our existing dashboards, but part of our Kubernetes solution in that whole Explorer view that you're looking at is this new dashboard framework that we're going to be coming out with. So if we want to build a dashboard that goes into there, we're going to go ahead and select this dashboard beta. So we're going to now select Add. And at this point, we're going to have a brand new dashboard up there, systems overview, showing our errors over time from that query we just wrote. And now the last thing we want to do is we want this to show up in the Explorer view. We could still get to it through our library, but maybe we want to have it as another level or another visualization in that cluster, sorry, the cluster level that we were looking at. So to do that, we simply just need to create what's called a stack linking. So we select that. And in particular, this is going to be linked up to a key of a cluster. And in particular, it's going to be that Prod1 travellogic.info cluster. We apply it. We save those changes. And then I'm going to just go in and I'm going to reopen my Explorer view. And being now that I'm at my cluster level, I could select my dropdowns and I could come right down to here and see that systems overview that we just created on here with the panel on there. With the insights as needed. So really quick, really easy, great time to value of getting the insights that are most valuable to us, including some custom visualizations as needed. So now we went through not only how to get the data in there, how to get some immediate insights, but also how to custom build that stuff. And honestly, it's not that hard to really get to this point and know how to navigate around and get the insights that you need. But to get you started, if you go back over here under the Home tab, right under here, you're going to see a Home, a Learn, and a Certification tab. If you select the Learn tab, you're going to have some videos to get you started. But things that I'm personally really passionate about are these two sets of tutorials down here. And I say I'm personally passionate about it because these are actually the same exact ones that I used to get my foundation, get my background in Sumo. It really brought me to the point that I'm at right now. But in all, if you go through them from start to finish in great detail, it might take you 1 or 2 hours at best. And it's going to bring you from getting your getting collections installed, to bringing data in, to writing queries, alerts, and dashboards, again, in a very short amount of time. So regardless of your level and your expertise in Sumo, I definitely recommend that you spend a little bit of time to go through these tutorials down here. Now, beyond that, if you select the certification tab on the top, this is going to bring you to some more training that's going to bring you from the fundamentals, which is just beyond those tutorials we were just looking at, and to more advanced topics like search mastery, administration, security analytics, Kubernetes, and metrics mastery. The entire certification program, from the training to the certification itself, is completely free, and it can all be done through this portal or different places around the country that we call our cert jams. So I definitely recommend that you look for cert jams coming up in your area, sign up for them, and attend one of these to become a Sumo master yourself. So with that, we've gone through most of the basics of Sumo. How do we get the data in? How do we get our insights? How do we run our analytics against this? And how do we even learn how to use this? So I think at this point, we're going to pivot back over into that Explorer view. And we're going to go through and we're going to try and troubleshoot a bit more of a deeper of an issue going on that we saw over in the PagerDuty pod when we were looking at it previously. So we're going to go back into our Explorer view, and we're going to go back into our cluster overview. Actually, this time I want to look at my namespace overview. And when we do that, just like before, we see that we have the issues with our prod log gen namespace. And we're going to drill into that cluster, and we're going to select the prod log gen namespace. And when it starts loading up on here, we're going to see, just like before, that just like with our Carbon Black pod having some starting and stopping issues going on here, we're going to look at our PagerDuty pod and see that's also having some sort of issues. We could highlight over that one and see that it's also having its spark line for on and off. So that, at least right now, is making us think that, you know what, this might be related. This might be very similar. It's probably a resource issue. But we want to double check it before we mess around with that, just so that we don't have to worry about it. So for this, we're going to go ahead and select the PagerDuty pod. And when we pull that up, it's going to bring us right back into the PagerDuty, sorry, into the pod dashboard for PagerDuty. And just like before, we see that we have a pod that's in a crash loop back off with thousands of restarts. Everything right now seems pretty much the same. But then we come down to our pod state. It's starting to look a little bit different. Doesn't look the same, but you know, it's still in some sort of back off on here. So we're going to come down, just confirm it's a memory issue. But wait, no. We look at our CPU issue limits. We look at our memory limits on here. We don't see really anything that's standing out to us of being a resource issue at this time. So now we're getting a little bit confused on here. What could be going on with this? So we come down a bit further, and we're going to look at our terminated containers by reason this time. Again, it looks a bit different. And we highlight over it, and we see that there is an error in that pod. So we know there's some sort of application error right now. That's what's causing this. But as many insights as we have, as many visualizations that we provide you out of the box, it's hard to really cover everyone's use cases out there. So sometimes we do still have to get our hands dirty and go deep into those logs. And that's what we're going to go through right now. Now, because all the logs and all the metrics are attached with all the same metadata, we can actually pivot around from them. So for example, if we come back up to our memory limit on here, we can actually select it, and we can actually pull up all of our logs from the PagerDuty pod by just selecting that. So we now have pod equals PagerDuty, and then this nice long string on there that right away is showing us, excuse me, is showing us the actual pod and the logs on there. We didn't have to copy it around or anything else like that. Now, we want to bring in a bit more data. Right now, it's only looking about 15 minutes, so we're actually going to look, say, at the last 90 minutes worth of data. We put that in there and run this again, still looking at that same PagerDuty pod. And now it's going to pull up all the about 3,500 messages. You know, we could start scrolling through here, start seeing if anything's standing out to us. And we're going to come in, and we should see a 401 error in here. That's telling us essentially what's going on. But, you know, it's a little bit hard to go through this. A little bit hard sometimes to find out what's going wrong. So we're simply going to hit log reduce. And that's going to take those hundreds and thousands of messages at once. And it's going to summarize it into those patterns in just a few seconds here. So normally this will take about 15 or so seconds. And there we go. 11 seconds, 3,545 messages summarized into just 54 patterns. Now, we could start going through here. Things might start standing out to us. Things might pop out, letting us know exactly what's going on. But if we go back into here at the very first page, we're going to notice that it's sorted by our count. Now, we don't necessarily know what we're looking for. We just know that something's going wrong in here. So fortunately, we don't have to look through 3,000 plus messages to figure that out. And we're going to come down and we're going to notice right here in line number 24, something that's really standing out to us is for some reason we're having that status code 401. Now we know our system enough. We know that a 400 is not normal for these internal systems. So that might be the first thing we want to look at. So we're going to go ahead and select that count. It's going to bring up all the messages that we have for that one. And then we could say that we want to look at all the messages surrounding one of these on here. What was going on? What's happening around it to let us know where we're having our issues. So we're going to go ahead and select the name on it. And we're going to look in a plus or minus 10-minute window, 5-minute window, or 1-minute window around that one error message that we're seeing here. So we'll do plus or minus 5 minutes around it. Now it's going to look at that entire pod, and it's going to pull up all the messages on there. And fortunately, it's only 5 that we have to look at on here. But we're actually going to bump this back again just a little bit further, maybe get a few more results because of the time range on that. And when we come into this, we're going to start seeing some things that are really starting to look a bit concerning. So for example, we see this access ID right here. For some reason, we're logging something about an access ID. We know that's a Sumo access ID for this. So we're actually going to select view as raw, and we're going to highlight that access ID on here. And we can actually right click on that, and we could select add selector text as or. And what that's going to do is that's going to put that right up here into our scope. It's going to look at the same logs, but it's also going to say that, you know what, I also possibly want to look at any logs containing that access ID on there. And again, because we're fully indexed, it's going to bring up any of those messages for us. Again, looking in the last hour. And now when we look at this, the first thing that's going to stand out to us is if we look in our field browser on here, we see a few more sources of data than last time for where these logs are coming from. So for example, one of our big metadata tags that we use outside of your Kubernetes tags is our source category. So we're going to select that. And when we come in here, we're going to notice that, yeah, we have those messages in our Kubernetes cluster, but we also have an internal set of logs on here that's only 2 messages that's populating. That's not a normal one for us that we know of. We select that, and it's going to refine it down to just show those labs internal logs on here. And we can see now that there are 2 logs in here showing that an access key was disabled and deleted. Now we know that this was disabled and deleted by someone from our SOC. So we could assume more than likely at this point, what happened was that key possibly got compromised or maybe accidentally deleted or something. And our SOC team went in there and disabled and deleted it. And at that point, we just need to come in here and recreate an access key, and that should get everything all back up and running. So in that point, once it's fixed, we'll be able to come back into our Explorer, and within a few minutes, we should see our PagerDuty pod coming back up and being nice and healthy again. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up now. Now, basically, we just went through a few different scenarios. We went through the ability to go in and have a visualization of an issue with some memory in our Kubernetes cluster. We got that resolved without having to run any kubectl command. Brought you through how you can bring the data in to get those insights in just a few minutes. And then we also were able to go through and understand how we could build that content out, how we can install the content, how could we learn how to do this, and then we got our hands dirty to really go in and explore those logs and get a solution for another issue in that cluster. So with that, I definitely invite everyone to go to sumologic.com, sign up for a free trial. We'll reach out to you, we'll work with you, we'll help you get this set up as well. But feel free as well to sign up on our free public Slack channel at slack.sumologic.com. And you'll get an invite, you'll be able to go in there, and we have tons of Sumo users and customers and employees all in there at all times, giving each other some assistance. So great resource as well. I mean, you could always reach out to me via email or in that public Slack. But with that, open to the floor to any questions anyone might have. Duncan, all you.
We haven't received too many questions in the Q&A currently. I know some were asked prior to the call. So one was whether or not the video would be recorded to share with coworkers. It has been recorded and will be sent out after the call, so that's available. We received another beforehand. Do you recommend using tags as opposed to using source categories for your Kubernetes logs, or is it mostly just personal preference? We found previously through talking to some of our customers that they generally use tags. They've turned out to be a little bit more useful and a little bit more of an intuitive way to search your logs in your Kubernetes cluster. Some have chosen to use source category over the historically, but for the most part, we do see tags being used.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, when it comes to source categories versus tags, like Duncan was mentioning, it is a little bit of personal preference. It also has to do with what are you most comfortable with right now? I would say, in the very least, make sure that you use those tags, but it always helps. It never hurts to have a good practice around your source categories and all the metadata so that you could pivot around and use it as needed, regardless of what your logs look like. Thanks, Duncan.
Yep.
Any other questions at all?
Let's see here. We have one. Can you integrate non-Kubernetes resources, ones that communicate with the Kubernetes cluster, into the same dashboard as your Kubernetes resources? Do you want to touch on the customizable aspects and stack linking again, Dan?
Yeah, so like we were mentioning, basically as long as all that data is coming into Sumo, and as long as you have that data available, we should be able to get it in there in some way, shape, or form. All that's required to get the data into Sumo, it doesn't have to be Kubernetes, but the only requirement to have logs sent into Sumo is that logs have to be in a UTF plain text format, and then metrics has to be Graphite, Carbon 2.0, Prometheus, host metrics if you're using our installed collectors, or CloudWatch metrics if you're using AWS. Obviously, if you're using Kubernetes, the best way is to go into your Prometheus, but we can work with a variety of different ones on there. Great. Any other questions at all, Duncan?
We've still got some flowing into the Q&A over here, so I'll have you answer this one live if you don't mind, Dan. One question came in: can you talk about Istio support for Sumo? Might be a good chance to touch on some of our supported third-party integrations.
Do you have any clarification around that?
We do not. It was a pretty general question there. I can answer that one through the chat as well.
Yeah, you broke up there just a little bit. Could you say that question again?
Sure. It's, can you talk about Istio support from Sumo?
Oh, yeah. So they're actually we're one of our launch partners for the solution. So we do have some pre-built content around that. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and pivot back over into Sumo to show you. So if we go back into here, go into our app catalog, pull this up in here, and we could just pull up Istio, and we could see that we have an app in here for that. But preview of the dashboards, we'll be able to see things like our number of applications, request count. We could see, it's a little bit hard to see on this little preview on here, but also I'm going to open that up on here. But all kind of different insights, visualizations into your Istio. So in the very least, we could get that data in there, and we are going to provide tons of different insights into it through these dashboards that you're going to see. But again, as long as we have that data, we can provide the insights and visualizations as needed.
Great, thanks, Dan.
Yep.
We got another question in here. How quickly can you correlate a Kubernetes event or alert with other layers of the environment, like your network firewall, AD, endpoints, load balancer, that type of thing? Right.
So that is going to probably be a bit more along the lines of when you're using source categories and why those are important. If anyone's confused about the concept of source categories that I keep referring back to, just know that is that's one of our built-in metadata tags, and we do have some best practices around it. So if you search our help docs for best practices, source categories, it will walk you through that. But that would be a way that it really makes it a lot easier to aggregate all your data into one. But nice and easy. If you weren't using something like that, maybe you could say like our cluster equals Prado1 star. We'll run that. And we're going to see some data coming in here. But we could also control bringing in more data. So we could put some Boolean logic in our scope. So for example, we might even say, or let's say underscore source category equals, say, Meraki. And we run that. And we look in here now, we could see that, yeah, we have all that Prado1 on here, but we also have a Meraki source that got brought into that. So now all of our logs are in here, and then we can go through our normalization of that using the parsing as needed. That's one of tons of different ways that we can correlate the data on here, probably one of the more simpler ways. All right, Duncan.
Great. Yeah, that's all we have in the Q&A currently.
Excellent. Okay, any other questions at all before we hand this back over?
We just had 2 more come over. For log collection, one of the 4 collectors, I'll answer this on the side.
Yeah, all right.
Sorry, that wasn't, I started reading it before reading it out loud. Yep, that looks like it. So I guess with that, we can close out today's webinar. I wanted to take a quick second to thank Dan for the really in-depth dive into Kubernetes. If anybody has any questions after the call, please feel free to reach out. We definitely invite you to open a free 30-day trial with Sumo to test out the Kubernetes solution rather. Join our public Slack channel or reach out to Dan with any additional questions. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.